And hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Sharing Your Journeys. And we have JJ back on for part two. We told you we weren't going to wait too long to do part two. And well, yes, here we are. Here we are. So we're going to delve right in. I'm not going to waste no time. So JJ, obviously we spoke about, well, we kind of dipped into a fair bit of your hosiery journey in our last episode. And obviously just me, being nosy as I like to be. I kind of want to delve more into that if you're happy to do so and basically see where this conversation takes us.
Yeah, let's do it. Sounds good.
Amazing, amazing. So I'll pass the floor to you.
Sure. Yeah. So I think we kind of talked about, a couple things just to kind of get everybody on the same page as to where my brain is, which is um, kind of at a very young age. And this was validated by my mom actually when I, kind of came out to her about my sensory needs around hosiery and things like that, and how I lusted for one of her friend's legs at a very pre-pubescent or kind of masturbatory puberty situation for us guys. And so there is like a separation between having sensory needs alongside of you have these desires and then you have high sensory needs going through puberty, and that is a mixture that just created a very unique story for me in regards to or compared to what I'll call somebody who doesn't have those things. I think a lot of our
Mm.
audience probably can relate to that, on the men's side, who had the nylon gene at a very young age. I would redefine as the nylon gene as, and I'm sorry to be all medical around this, I just have done a lot of therapy, but effectively, I think there is a predisposition that I have genetically towards um, certain sensory fabrics.
Yeah.
So it goes beyond even hosiery or nylon or spandex. It goes to micromodal fabrics and things like that. So
Wow.
I'm not trying to say that my fetish isn't very important or the fetish that I have isn't there. I raised in the last one that what I want to advocate for is by wearing every day in what I'll call a non-soft core way, meaning I'm not trying to make people thirst trap me
Mm.
with my wearing, or I don't show a lot of feet for that reason. Um, on this chat, I'm happy to go there because it is, I think, important to talk about the full spectrum, and I want to go there. So
Yeah, it's
I
amazing.
had this, yeah, and I had this desire. The first time I wore was a pair of burgundy tights from my mom's stash. My mom would always wear long dresses, and the dresses were actually super soft as well. And I always asked my mom about that, like when I was talking about the tights, like, did you feel like you had sensory fabrics? Because my mom tended to wear more high polyester, high nylon content, elastane fabrics. So
Mm.
she would do like a nice long skirt that would flow with, you could see definitely her calves in her tights. And so I think she wore colors like navy, burgundy, black a lot. She tended to stay away from
Yeah.
nudes. So I get a lot of questions like, why don't you wear more nudes, or why don't you wear more,
Mm.
suntan? And for me, I think it is a combination of just what I grew up with, but also I like the obvious nature of like, if you're gonna wear, wear. I do think though that, let's just say I was out with other people who were wearing tights as well. So in the last year or so, I've been with guys. I typically don't like to have everybody wearing obvious tights all the time
Mm.
because I get kind of overstimulated around like my hypervigilance of like wanting to control the
Yeah.
situation gets triggered. Um, so what I'm trying to articulate here is like, I was more drawn to colors for a multitude of reasons. And so I typically stay in the blacks, burgundies, navies, actually, sorry, blacks and navies and grays first, then like your typical unisex colors of dark
Yeah.
greens and things like that, um, as well. So then that was my first pair. I wore to a pumpkin patch underneath some sweat. sweatpants, and it was incredibly uncomfortable. Um, I was sweating. I was anxious and excited. And
Bless.
this was definitely prepubescent to where like just let your minds go there for a minute, guys, of like what that means. But I didn't have any of that stimulation. And I just wore it for the enjoyment. And it was just like there was a part of me, as I kind of imagined back, that was really, even with that discomfort and even with the sweat, I was proud of myself for giving it a shot. And also there was, I would call it like a dopamine high from being doing something that was forbidden. So I'll own that a little bit. Um, but it comes down to forbidden. I think forbidden is part of kind of the fetishization of it. And part of my story, which is I just knew it was forbidden because I grew up in a family that was very conservative around rocking the boat and being different.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm going to pause there, and then I'll kind of get into more of like the 9 to 18 years. Do you have any questions?
Okay. Yeah, because I did want to actually ask, because you obviously mentioned about, and it's interesting like getting everyone's perspective on this because it is so, everybody has a unique take on it. And you mentioned about it being a fetish. And I just want to obviously, because for me, when you think fetish, you think like it's like extreme. It's an extreme of something. Um, Whereas like how would you define fetish? What's your perception on fetish and even kink, if we're gonna kind of go there? Like what's your kind of perception on that?
Yeah, and thank you for the question. I think it's an important question to just. I think the answer is subjective, even though there's like medical, definition.
Mm.
An example of a medical definition right now. What I mean by that is right now
Oh, go on.
I'm I'm a transvestite right now, meaning I'm a male wearing culturally women's clothing or a cross-gendered clothing. A woman who's wearing a tuxedo or a woman who's wearing a suit that is we'll call it a more male cut. That would
Mm.
also be transvesticism by definition. Okay. Do I
Wow.
identify as a transvestite from Transylvania for all those Rocky Horror Picture Show fans? I don't. However, even for my therapies and anxiety, I have to claim that if somebody called me a transvestite, I I actually am by definition. Um, my definition of fetish is probably a little bit more medically inclined, which is like it is extreme to a place where it gets in the way of me interacting with the world. In my opinion, a kink is something like if you had a beer and you can leave the beer at any point, but you enjoy beer a lot and you enjoy it more than, say, a soda in the evening, um, or not drinking, I would articulate that as a metaphorical kink, meaning if I was in a relationship with somebody, and I really have always liked tights on women, for example, I could go to Hooters and be pleasantly titillated about that. And yet at the
Mm.
same time, if I was with the waitress getting intimate, obviously outside of work, I wouldn't need to have her wear during intimacy. However, the kink would be like, wow, like I wonder if she's into it. And then, if she does use it or wear it and it adds to her and to mine, um, even if she gets off on the fact that I'm getting off on it, I kind of articulate that as a kink because the connection really isn't threatened by the kink.
Mm.
Whereas fetishism for me is it hits me in so many different areas, right? So the fetishism bleeds into everyday wear. The fetishism bleeds into um, intimacy. And so I'm going to pause there. I have one more thought about it as well. Any thoughts
Okay.
on that or questions for clarity?
No, it's interesting. No, it is interesting. And like I do understand where you're coming from because that's pretty much how I kind of define see a kink versus a fetish. And it is very interesting. And like I said, it is very it's very different for different people. And like for instance, like how we were saying, with like my good friend Oscar, and like when he like when basically they do encasement, that could be the whole, some people call that really extreme. And I've had it before when actually when they've heard it, like our conversation, and they're like, oh my God, like he's so extreme. And it's like, but is he? Is he actually extreme? Like what do you know what I mean? So it is very interesting, but I do like everyone's different insights into it though, to be fair. So yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
in my journey, and I'll just give you milestones. So this gets back to the story. So after 8 to 18, I go through puberty. I would identify during this time as a fetish of puberty masturbatory. So I went through puberty. My first masturbation experience was in hosiery. This is like really going over my skis. So I'm just going to go ahead and disclaim it. If a future employer hears this, it's really therapeutic and meant to be said in love. And I hope that people can respect my opinions as my own. Um, I just felt like a very strong feeling of
Hmm.
being scared, but also I'm not. Um, my 8 to 18, when I went through puberty, my first masturbatory experience was in tights. Um, and it was very intoxicating dopamine in that way. And so it became somewhat addictive in those ways. Um, I would still wear, and it would lead me towards that. Um, I would have my maybe 1 to 2, 3 pairs in my room. Um, I always get the question like, "Did your mom find out?"
Mm.
I come from a family of don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. Very much what I kind of call uh, like a descendant or genetic chain of alcoholics. I am not an alcoholic, but I identify as an addict. And props to my parents for stopping that. So we just don't talk about our feelings much, like many families out there.
Get you.
And so even if my mom found something like that, we wouldn't talk about it. So during that phase, I wouldn't articulate that there was shame, which is actually kind of cool during those ages because it was airtight behind closed doors. The only thing was the threat of being found out. And so
Mm.
I was able to contain it. Things get interesting when I go to college. Um, I started experimenting wearing multiple pairs at a time, um, and finding multiple ways of having orgasms and what I kind of call releasing, in and around them, and started getting into porn. I got into porn at around 14. I was introduced to it. I think it was a little early for me.
Mm.
And so as I think about attractions, I would identify as a fetish sexual or a tights sexual in regards to that phase for sure. Because even now at the age of 41, I am confused about my sexuality. Um, because you don't hear fetish sexual or tights sexual or things like that. And I've heard it from people one-off conversations in the tights community. So I want to endorse that you're seen if you identify that way. However, and the way I define that is I'm into men and women who are into it and don't see it as a negative for a guy to be into it.
Yeah.
And I think that comes with its great benefits, but also its own challenges, which I'll talk about when we talk about me being in the 40s, which is um, when I was transitioning from like 18 and porn to dating, I never really brought it out until I was in college. Um, and to be quite honest, I can't remember the first time I really wore for a person. I really can't. But all I can tell you is that my relationships with women from like 18 to even like my marriage were, um, I would call it very healthy in many, many ways. However, this closeted tights part I was so fearful that people would call me gay or ironically a
Mm.
transvestite or a cross-dresser or closeted trans. So I had this deep fear that was connected to sex, which obviously was very intense because that's a very human part of us.
Yeah.
And that is just a recipe for, I'll call it dysfunction or maladapt, not dysfunction. That sounds too medical or prescriptive, but more like it was getting in the way of my life, which is like maladaptive. So the way that that would manifest was, let's just say, when I went to college and during the summers, I always would tell women I really like it when they would wear hosiery. That would be the first step. The
Mm.
second step would be over time trying to integrate that, I have this. So safety was the key. The longer I dated the girl, the higher likely. And so I finally had a girl that, again, I can't remember the specific instance, but I definitely integrated it by say 2003 to 2006, kind of in my later years of college. And it would only be in relationships. I was pretty much sex only in relationships. I still am struggling with that in regards to ethics of sex. And I think that just becomes my fear of being rejected because of my tights. That's a
Mm.
breakthrough for me to say that because I'm embarrassed. And I'll pregnant pause that for people to feel that I am embarrassed. I don't want to wear tights because the discomfort of the world invalidating it because it's so different and draws what I'll call attention because it is so different. And then being a hyper vigilant person of having fear of rejection or fear of falling behind or the fear of, just not being part of the crew or being picked last, for example, in a sport is very severe for me.
Mm.
Um, I had a neighbor last couple days be like, "You're a terrible neighbor. You're way too loud." And really all that was happening was my kids and I were watching a movie, and my kids were so excited to get a dessert out of the kitchen. And I mean, I
Mm.
felt that for a good 6 hours, um, and that gets in the way of me living my life. And then I started yelling at my kids more than I typically would. Yelling's too strong, but just to give you an example of like how much I feel that.
Yeah.
And that gets in the way of my relationships as well. So a quick tangent to try to ground those concepts. Um, I don't want to be bisexual. I don't want to be into tights. However, I am. And I have a choice there is the pain of suffering of not wearing tights and making it a need in my relationships, a
Mm.
need that I can meet every day, which I'm wearing today. And if I discount it to be a want, a like, or something that's just like, oh, it's a nice to have,
Mm.
that's an invalidation to me in order to stay safe out in the real world, which gets back to a fetish, which is the fetish gets in the way. And I've dated women who refuse to date me, even though they like me and they respect that I'm a bisexual, but because I have an affinity for men's dicks, for example, they're not going to be able to meet all my needs. So then it becomes a non starter,
Mm.
or vice versa. It goes both ways. It's not like a man
Yeah.
can be threatened by me sleeping with a woman. So there's a lot in there that we could have a whole conversation or pod about. But from 8 to 18, it was easier than 18 to 33 because 18 to 33, life gets complex. Your friends get
Mm.
dating. I never really dated seriously. I finally got serious in like the mid 2000s. I was like in my 20s. And then before getting married, I had it be a want in my relationships. And so my partner at the time would, I call partner, a dating partner, would wear for me, and it was incredible. But she just didn't really desire to wear them that often. She kind of
Yeah.
subscribed to the Sex in the City here in the States, which is bare legged, bare leg, bare
Mm.
leg, because she didn't want to be judged for wearing pantyhose here in the States because it's seen as kind of a fashion faux pas in certain ways. Whereas I believe in Europe, sheer black and opaque tight rhythms um, are more typical and are built into the culture. Plus climate. Let's just be
Oh
real.
yeah, yeah. I hear that because we're just the same here in the UK. Like it is very much even all like my amazing women that I have in my circle, whether it be family, friends, loved ones, whoever, it is very much they don't grasp the concept of me wearing what like for instance, it's going to be 28 degrees tomorrow. I'll be in an 8 denier pair. Don't get me wrong, I'll probably be struggling, but it's just me because I enjoy wearing them from a fashion perspective. And it is that whole thing of not many women, especially women, grasp that concept in terms of, well, actually it's summer, it's supposed to be bare legs. Like, why are you not doing bare legs? And it's like, well, I'm not comfortable doing bare legs. I prefer hosiery on. But it is very each to their own. I like that's the very nicest way of saying it is just each to their own.
Sure. And I'll restate, I'm literally one of the discoveries last week, even since the last pod, is I'm now working on rediscussing to myself that I have a fabric need or like soft fabric desires, of which
Mm,
pure hosiery and women's hosiery are the apex of desire. But I need to honor it, that it goes well across that, because it is the truth and accurate. And if I'm not accurate, I'm still living in the shame of
mm,
that vertical within that umbrella of just, I love soft fabrics. I got a wind like sunshade for my deck, and it was spandex. Of course, I love that. It's sheer, the way it
mhm.
moves, but that's aesthetically pleasing to me.
Yeah,
And then like to touch it and like to see the shapes that it makes, it's like incredible. Like I get the same sensory desire, like, oh, I want to go touch it because it moves and then it comes back. It's like there is something very primal about that fabric, or like the micromodal, or these dress shirts that I have like a very
mm,
soft um t-shirt material that keeps me not only cool but keeps the shirt there. And there's some nice benefits, and it's like a soft modal blend.
yeah.
um like the sweatshirts I wear, one of my friends worked for Apple, and I got these really dope ass um Mr. Rogers here in the States, for those PBS fans, sweatshirts. And first of all, it's a great build quality, but like it is the most fucking comfortable sweatshirt I've had
Mm.
since my brother got me a Uniqlo one. So now I'm even more having an affinity towards this Uniqlo, or sorry, not Uniqlo. Sorry, I totally botched this, but Lululemon. Shout out to Vancouver. Shout out to
Oh,
Angela Bott for that.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So the Lululemon one, but I think my brother spent US dollar like 150 US for like an embroidered, not embroidered, but a logoed National Basketball Association, Cleveland Cavaliers. Shout out to my hometown. Um, sweatshirt. But that also is part of my fetish, which is soft fabric. So I guess I could argue that I
Mm,
love satin sheets or high count, thread. So I want to also include that in the accuracy. But let's just
yeah,
be blunt. Like I'm going to go to the sweetest fruit. I'm going to go to the sweetest flower. I'm going to eat a pineapple before an unripe apple. So I'm going to the tights.
yeah.
So I'm not trying to discount that. So I
Mm.
think that's really important as well. Quick time check for you, Sony. How many minutes do we have left so that I can maybe talk about what 28 to today looks like quickly?
We probably have about just up to 10.
Okay, cool. So that's plenty then. So I'm going to talk about the phase of like the girlfriend to my ex-wife, and I do want to respect all of my partners. So I'm going to keep it relatively opaque, pun intended there, is to protect her defense and her privacy, because I have deep,
Yeah.
deep love for her. I'm still able to reflect on that time that we had. Everything was real, everything's authentic, and I still work through the fact of grief that I both loved her and I very much was, it was what it was, and everything unfolded
Mm,
as it unfolded. But also that I had things that, as I continued to develop who I was, with the complexities of the life that I had, of these buried fetishes and the buried, I'll call it, addictions that I had, and then my anxious attachment. I call it the Bermuda Triangle of I
Mm.
have ADHD that was undiagnosed. I have insecure anxious attachment. So I call it the AAA, which is the ADHD attachment and addiction. And I think they're all the same. That's why I kind of put them all together. But I'm always on that triangle. And my goal is to
Yeah.
live a more sober life outside of that, more attached with myself,
Mm.
understanding where my ADHDs get in the way, but recognizing that there's skills that I can use and help I can have, um, and find ways to attach to myself.
I hear that.
And so I think my video just froze. Is that
Yeah, because now you're not
okay?
moving.
There we go. Yeah. So I'm gonna leave it that way. Sorry for the technical difficulties.
It happens. It happens.
Is I'm gonna stand for this. The point I wanted to make was my wife, and I still call her, I'll always call her my wife. I have the right to do
Mm.
that because I have deep, compassionate love for her. Is that, and we're not best friends. We're really good co-parents. And there's a lot of nuance there, but that's my belief. My fetish got in the way of our marriage. My fetish confused my sexuality, getting back to what I brought up about tight sexual.
Yeah.
My fetish got in the way because I told her that I like to have it. I waited to disclose to her until I felt really connected. A data point that's
Mm.
important was when we were engaged, I talked to her very much about it because we were in a church that, um, and I had sex before that, like true intercourse before that, but I was part of a church that really believed in um, a quick to marriage courting, knowing that there is sexual needs and desires. So I appreciated that because I think it was an appropriate dialectic, which is, you know, the ideal was women need to be pursued and men need to be serious in order to make this work. And women need the protection. And again, I know I'm mansplaining here and there's some toxicity in here. So just forgive me, listener. Is that also kind of led to some of the dysfunction because I was incented to wait, but I did disclose to her as part of, pre-marriage, that I
Yeah.
had this. I also raised that I had attractions to men, but I felt like I had worked through that. Honestly, I was more attracted to women. I never had sex with a man, never had masturbatory side hustles with men ever. Um, I am a very compliant person, um, and very honest. I suck at holding secrets. And so I was very transparent. But in the marriage, things developed. Um, when she would wear, it was like pouring gasoline on a fire. It was the hottest. It was so fucking hot. And to bring some levity, and this is about as close to the details that I want to give because it's
Mm-hmm.
ours. Um, but maternity tights added some spice to our relationship, and I think that can kind of be a metaphor for the whole relationship, which was, let's just be real, ladies wear maternity tights. So here in the States, maternity tights season for men who are into tights, it's like hell yeah. So um I smile because it's like as a tights guy, I am so scrapping for stimulation in that world. I find it humorous in a way. And so props to my ex-wife and things like that for she honored those needs, but
Mm.
she has said to me that it got in the way of her believing that I loved her for her versus I
Yeah.
loved her for the tights.
Yeah.
And that's heartbreaking to me because that makes me misunderstood, misintended. All of those things that I talked about are my biggest fears. And so that was just like a
Mm.
bomb in our relationship. And I felt hurt by that. I wish I would have changed a couple of things to tell her how much that hurt me. because I couldn't change that. And what I was learning is that it wasn't just a nice to have, which is the words I used to use. But again, that was because I wanted to stay safe and let her know that I loved her first, which was really well
Yeah.
intended, but it wasn't the truth. So I was holding a lie. And I have to call it objectively what it is. It is technically a lie if I was refereeing or counseling the situation.
Mm.
So I'm willing to go there, which is if I had a pie chart for what got in the way of my relationship, I would say the fetish itself was, and I mean the umbrella fetish, which is sexuality covering. And so confusion of sexuality plus the hosiery needs
Mm.
versus what I'll call your regular average dysfunction. Every relationship has dysfunction, period. Like there's a whole couples counseling, billions of dollars. That's where I'm leaning into. So there
Yeah.
obviously was that. Um, but then there was also just some other factors. And I'd love to just kind of give you the pie chart of that, which is the sexuality piece, in my opinion, and this would look different for her. Um, for me, I identified that I disqualified myself from the marriage. I believe that leadership is knowing when you can serve the needs of your team and serve the needs of those around you. And I'm a big believer in people should own their shit and pull
Mm.
themselves out of a position if they can no longer serve the people that they're serving. I know that sounds very heebie-jeebie Christian leadership bullshit, but that really resonates with my ethic. I have so much respect for people who, if they're having a sexual relation with a coworker, they will pull themselves out of the role, or if they're having a sexual connection with somebody in a community, they'll come out with it so that there's clarity, um, because the other person deserves to know. And
Mm.
so all the listeners are probably like, Jared, just fucking answer the question. So I'll also address those people who are thinking that. Is
You have 3 minutes to do so.
I know I'm thinking though, because I want to make sure that this is accurate because it's going to be on the record. So as of today, I would say that for me, the tights in the actual marriage, so this is part of the fetish, would cover probably 30% the sexuality confusion, the confusion, because it was getting in the way of our intimacy. And then for
Mm.
her, it was very dissonant, meaning it created a ton of anxiety because, again, I told her that I was in therapy doing it. And she's like,
Yeah.
I need 100% assurance that I am loved, bar none. And so I was being honest, but then had some real challenges. And she's a very strong woman, incredibly smart. And I love seeing her ascend in her career. She's kick ass, boss bitch, love it. I would say that 40 to 50% was the sexuality confusion. And then that kind of leads to just your remaining pieces of dysfunction, which I would say is probably 10 to 15%. Wasn't a huge deal. Um, but then incompatibilities, communication. I'll
Yeah.
call it my high sensitive, rejection sensitive, effeminate side of me, and that I'm claiming and owning and reducing my shame with. That she had needs of an assertive, extroverted. What you guys are getting, this is what she fell in love with. But there's a complete other side of me that is soft and effeminate and empathetic.
Mm.
And so she fell in love with this. And it's really hard based on the circumstances that we had to fall in love with what was behind closed doors, which was depression, anxiety, and the complexities of that. I was over 300 pounds, and I was suicidal. Trigger warning, I guess, in arrears. So I pulled myself out of the marriage. Hardest thing I've ever done. I hurt her, period. I'll never be able to get that back. And I respect her for being that honest, because I think a lot of
Yeah.
women don't want to hurt the men that leave.
Yeah.
Um, but I appreciate her respect, and it's helped us be better parents for our kids. Um, and so I'll pause after that because I think that there is details that I've never talked about, but I needed to really be strategic about not
Yeah.
disclosing her confidence and her
Yeah.
privacy because I deeply, deeply, deeply love her. And I'm not just saying that to protect my ass. I'm saying that because it's true. And I always will love her, but I loved her enough to let her go from my perspective. And I was the one who divorced her because I want to see her love and be loved in ways that, frankly, I was incapable of loving,
Yeah.
that I believe that she has found in her journey. So,
Literally, I'm so sorry, everybody. We had such an abrupt ending, but we're not going to stop there. We're not going to stop there. We're not going to stop there. Only just because it was such an important, crucial part of JJ's story. And so, JJ, I'm going to hand the platform straight back to you, just so you can literally finish off where you was.
yeah, no worries. Really, it just comes down to deep, compassionate love is enough to leave the post in order for that person to find what they need. And to me, that is love. And I have honored that grief by really the next phase of my life, which we don't have time to talk about. But since the divorce, um, how does that relate to my fetish and hosiery journey? Again, fetish being just kind of the confusion around sexuality and the confusion around, or not confusion, but deep attraction
Yeah.
to tights and hosiery. So that's really what I wanted to finish up with. So thanks again for the opportunity to share. Definitely um, feeling nervous about this one in a good way because it's helping me. I'll be able to listen to this and go back and find more closure because of this. So thanks again for the opportunity to share.
So let me just say, one, a massive thank you just for being open and honest and frank and actually allowing yourself to do that, because I know everybody deals with stuff in a very different way. I can imagine you might need some space after this just to reflect. I'm like, okay, just need to gather myself again. But I do want to just thank you, and just on behalf of everybody who's going to be watching and listening, the fact that you're giving us an insight into that, and not many people will speak about it. Not many people would admit a lot of stuff the way that like you have shared most of your journey with us all. And it, to me, I deeply, I just really just want to say I really deeply appreciate that, because I know how tough it can be, and there are going to be a lot of thoughts and feelings and emotions around this. And I just want to say thank you for sharing, because it's for me, it's very beautiful to hear somebody be so raw and so open and so vulnerable and put themselves in that position. And yeah, it's a very admirable thing to do. So I just want to say thank you so much, JJ,
Yeah.
for that. It's just, it's incredible. Honestly, it's incredible. I'm just in awe. I'm really in awe.
Yeah. One quick thought to summarize what I heard there. And tights have hurt people around me, and that's heavy and that's hard,
Mm.
especially because it's something that tights allow me to meet my needs, which is a beautiful thing. And there's tension between those two. And then there's costs of those two, which is anxiety, shame, guilt, struggle, even depression. But with,
Mm.
I'll call it love and hate, we have to walk in love, and we can choose to walk in love. And sometimes love is very hard and it can hurt other people. But the most
Mm.
loving thing we can do sometimes is let something go. And healing is one of the ways that I'm doing it. So I'm recovering and I'm healing from that. And yeah, it's been over 5 to 6 years. And I'm grateful to continue the story in the next one.
Yeah. So by the way, everybody, we're definitely be doing a part 3. obviously, if it's okay with you, JJ, just because I'd love to, obviously, as comfortable as you are sharing, I'd love to hear more about your post-divorce and how, like, basically how life is for you post-divorce and where you are now, and especially obviously the fact that you talk about mental health and therapy and everything, which I think is absolutely brilliant. There needs to be more of that. But it'd be really lovely to hear that part of your journey. Obviously, if you're willing to do a part three and share that with us all.
Yeah, it's great. I would love to. Thank you.
Yay. Okay, so people, part three is gonna happen. I can't wait. So yeah, right. So we'll actually call it now because obviously we like to keep these nice and short and sweet. But yeah, if anybody does have any questions that they want to ask JJ or anything that they want clarifying, I will be putting obviously his Instagram into the bio. And you can just ask questions wherever you're listening, because I know Spotify, I've got a question section. So yeah, so literally just, yeah, I want to get everybody involved. And I'm sure if people do resonate, please let us know as well, just because it's nice just to hear everybody else's story. It's one thing, obviously, me and JJ sitting here having this discussion, but actually we find it quite nice when actually people do get involved and actually share parts of their journey, especially if it has resonated. So yeah, do get in touch, do get in touch. But thank you so much for coming on, JJ, for part two. I'm super psyched for part three already, if you can't tell. Um, but yeah, until the next one. So thank you so much, love and gratitude going your way.
And vice versa. Love going out to the community for those that still struggle with everything and are kind of somewhere along this path as well. But also to the women out there that support men in wherever they're at and to have an open up mind. You know, I want to dedicate this episode to them because I think we all deserve love. So
Yeah,
yeah, let's do it. See you soon.
yeah, I like that. Well, take it for now, Jared, and I will see you in the next one.
Bye, dear one. Cheers.